out afterwards along with the slides. So folks who aren't able to join us live can go back and view it, or those of you who are here, if you want to go back and watch the recording later on. But why don't we go ahead and introduce ourselves? If you don't mind putting in the chat, maybe what department you're with, what year you are, if you're a student or a faculty, a staff, and maybe even if you wanted to share how much experience you have with technical writing, that would be great. So I'll go ahead and start by introducing myself. My name is Brianna Hughes. I use she, her pronouns. I am one of the science, reference, and instruction librarians. I'm also the graduate student services librarian at UMBC. So this is the first of our graduate student skills workshops. It's something new that we're doing this year for the first time, and this is the first of our series of workshops. We have 3 others coming up later on in the semester. All of our workshops, including those 3, are listed on MyUMBC. So if you are interested in graduate student workshops, be sure to check those other 3 listed on our MyUMBC. Great, got some PhD students, welcome. Grad student in cybersecurity, great. Great, well, as folks are introducing themselves, let's go ahead and get started. This is our agenda for today. We're going to start out kind of introducing technical writing, talking about what it is, establishing a definition, talking about why it's important. We're going to then talk about the core features, kind of like how do you structure a piece of technical writing? What are some of the typical sections that you might see in a piece of technical writing. We'll talk about style, formatting, and audience, and how those things all kind of play a role in technical writing. We'll talk about, readability, what it means to consider your audience when you are writing a piece of technical writing. Then we'll wrap up. I've got some resources at the end, some other kind of housekeeping stuff, and then we will be taking questions as we go. So at the end of each of these sections, I'll pause for questions, but please feel free. My colleague Joe is here, another member of the reference department, and Joe will be monitoring the chat. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat as we go, or you can unmute and call them out when we take a break for questions. So thank you all for being here. Yeah, no matter where you are in graduate school, or if you're not even in graduate school yet, I hope that this will be helpful when you think about technical writing. So starting out with, what is technical writing? Why is it something that we need to think about? When is it useful? Why is it useful? Where do you see technical writing out in the wild? So to start with the definition, technical writing, also sometimes called scientific writing, but they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. But technical writing communicates specialized information to a defined audience in a precise, concise, and structured way so that readers can easily access it and act on it. So it's important to think about technical writing because it really helps move along research. It helps move along the science field or any interdisciplinary field. And it really plays a role when you think about getting funding, the peer review process, making your research replicable so that other researchers can access it and reproduce it. And if conversely, if you think about having your writing is inaccessible, then it makes it really hard for funders, peers in your field, or others who are interested in reading your writing. It makes it really hard for them to follow, and it may as well, be invisible. So it's really important to think about technical writing as a standard style of writing. And, each of these things that we get into, the hallmarks of technical writing, they exist for a reason. So I wanted to offer some examples of technical writing. We all are familiar with academic articles that you find in peer-reviewed journals. And those are certainly examples of technical writing, but they're not the only examples. Let's take a look at each of these 3 examples as we go. So this is an article from an open access academic database. And it's, examination of the ocean as a source for atmospheric microplastics. A very standard academic article, peer-reviewed article. We've all seen hundreds of these probably at this point. But it is a type of technical writing. We also have here a report from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association. This is a technical report. Technical is right in the title there. And if we were to look at it, it has a lot of the hallmarks, a lot of the markers for a piece of technical writing. But it's something that's been put out by a national association. It's not technically a peer-reviewed article, but it's still very much technical writing. And then the third example is a report from the U.S. Geological and Survey Group, the USGS. Again, another piece of technical writing from a government source, but not necessarily a peer-reviewed article. So there's lots of different places you might see technical writing, but they all, again, have a lot of similarities. Before I move on, I do want to pause, make sure that if there are any questions so far about what is technical writing, how do we define it, I want to give space for those questions. So feel free to put them in the chat or come off mute and share them aloud. Okay, all right. Let's move on. So talking about the core features, some hallmarks of technical writing, and as well as, how do you structure a piece of technical writing? So there, if you were to Google different pieces or elements of technical writing, you're going to find a lot of different information, but the 6 that I'm going with that I find most helpful to think about are these 6. So clarity, organization, concision, integrity, accuracy, and audience awareness. So for me, when I think about technical writing and the elements of it, these are the 6 things that I think about. We're going to take a look at each one of these independently. So the first, clarity. What do we mean when we say clarity? Well, we mean concrete nouns, specific verbs, things that don't leave any kind of room for confusion or, uncertainty, language that follows a very logical subject, verb, object order of things. And when we talk about why this is important, why clarity is important, well, it reduces misinterpretation. It lets readers or reviewers understand the main point of your writing on their first read or their first skim of your piece of writing. An example of this would be something like, a non-clear example would be an investigation was conducted. Okay, an investigation was conducted. There's a much clearer way to say that. We investigated. So you want to put the action as part of the verb, cutting out any extra words that might be unnecessary. The next of our 6 hallmarks is concision. So this would mean no extra words, but you still you retain the same message. So I have here due to the fact yet. That's like those are extra words. Replace clusters of words with more strong action words. So performed an analysis of would be converted to analyzed. Instead of using due to the fact that, we might use because. So it respects your reader's time. It lowers cognitive load. It allows folks to really get to the meat of your technical writing without having to wade through extra words. I think this is one of the harder things for folks when doing technical writing. We want to sound important. We want to make sure that we come across as we know what we're talking about. Also, when we're excited about research that we've done or we're excited about what we're writing about, we tend to not necessarily think about the words that we use in terms of brevity. So thinking about being concise, eliminating words that aren't absolutely necessary while still maintaining meaning. The third is accuracy. So using precise numbers and units, making sure that you're citing all of your evidence, using things like suggests or indicates, is consistent with when it's appropriate to do those things. So to avoid overstating your results. Accuracy maintains credibility and supports replication. So it allows folks who are interested in replicating your research, it allows room for them to have, perhaps not the exact same results as you. If a claim might change your reader's interpretation of the results, make sure you quantify it. Again, it really allows folks the opportunity to replicate your research, but still feel like they're part of the conversation if they don't exactly get the same outcomes as you. Organization, this is really important. So when we think about a piece of technical writing, it needs to be organized. This might mean using a format or a standard order of sections. IMRAD is a common acronym that we're going to get into in just a minute. Making sure that you're using clear and numbered headings. Make sure you begin each paragraph with a topic sentence so that those who are skimming your article or your piece of writing kind of knows at the top of each paragraph what that paragraph is about. Making sure that you're keeping, a good flow to your explanations, placing figures and tables close to the first time that you mention them, right when you cite them. All of this really helps skimmers or readers to navigate your paper. And also when you think about, journals, grant organizations, they have expectations on how papers are formatted a lot of times, right? So making sure that you're including all of these things from the get-go can really help you when you're going into the peer review or like the grant review process. Then we have integrity. Integrity, especially for those of us who are in the sciences fields, is really important. This means that it's a combination of objectivity and then also transparency. So describing your full methods and your research settings, making sure that you disclose any limits you faced or assumptions you had, making sure that you're citing all of your tools and your data, you're sharing your raw data or code when you can. Integrity works a lot towards building trust with your readers, whether they're, again, a grant panel or a review panel. It enables folks to replicate your work again, and then also thinking about, again, journal and ethical requirements, making sure that you're meeting all of those requirements. And then finally, the sixth thing I like to think about when I'm thinking about technical writing is audience awareness. So being cognizant of who is going to be reading your piece of writing. You don't always know, but when you do, making sure that you're keeping that in mind. We're going to dive into this a little bit more later on, but just briefly, this means doing things like defining acronyms and key terms the first time you use them, not leaving it for the reader to guess what that might mean. Making sure that you are calibrating your detail and vocabulary to the reader's level of understanding. Offering some context, maybe a line or two before you offer your results, avoiding any kind of cultural specific idioms. I think that's a bad habit that I have. I work really hard to make sure that I'm presenting my writing to an international audience. The reason for all of this is, it broadens the reach that your writing can have beyond your local community, beyond geographic community to a broader field. It also reduces when you're working with a reviewer, it reduces need to do a back and forth, which can sometimes lead to faster acceptance or inclusion into a journal. And then it also really supports cross-cultural or cross-discipline collaboration. So by making your piece of writing as accessible to a widest amount of audience, the widest scope of audience as you can really show that you respect other readers, respect folks in different disciplines. So let's pause for a second before we move on to talking about style and formatting. And let me take any questions or any comments anyone has. Does anyone want to, if there are other things that they think about beyond these 6 things when they're doing technical writing, I'd love to hear them. Or if you, want to highlight one of these that you really struggle with when you're doing technical writing, that'd be good too. Jay says something that they struggle with is clarity and conciseness. Yes, I offered this workshop for the first time last summer. And I think I mentioned this later on in the presentation, but one good rule of thumb is that no sentence should be longer than 25 words. And the PhD students I was presenting this to, their minds were blown. They're like, what? You can have sentences that are less than 25 words? And I was like, yeah, that's really kind of what you should be aiming for. And so, yeah, I say, when it's something that you're so passionate about or that you have been so immersed in for an extended period of time, it's hard to remember that not everyone is as passionate about it as you are. Think that I struggle, different style requirements. Yes, yeah, different journals, different funding groups have different style requirements. Oh yeah. So thinking about formatting. So there's obviously rules specific to technical writing, but also rules specific to whatever citation style you're meant to be using. We have, and I don't know, Joe, if you could put this in the chat, we have some resources for citation and formatting styles on our website, but also each of our subject librarians, research librarians, are really willing to help out with questions like that, you know, helping folks kind of figure out APA 7 or MLA, IEEE, whatever citation or formatting style you're working with. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to us and we'd be happy to help. Yeah, thanks, Joe. Those are some of the resources we have online. It's definitely not an exhaustive list. So if there are other citation formatting styles you'd like help with, please feel free to reach out. An example of writing a paragraph with a topic sentence. So I do have some examples a little bit later on, but I would say that think about, you know, we're all, I think, familiar with the idea of a thesis statement. You know, a statement that really, or a research statement that really encapsulates the entirety, the totality of your research question. Think of a topic sentence as like a miniature version of that. So what is that paragraph that you're writing? What is it saying? And then summarize that in a sentence so that if I'm skimming a research article or a piece of technical writing, I can just read the first sentence of a paragraph and know, is this a paragraph I need to do a deeper dive into, or do I get the gist of it by just that first sentence? But I do have some suggestions, some examples later on about topic sentences. Taylor says, as a neurodivergent person, I struggle with simple, plain language. I often over-explain myself. Yeah, very verbose when I get excited. I think we're all guilty of that. Plain language makes things more disability inclusive. Yeah, accessibility friction between myself and my community makes me struggle a lot with constantly revising my writing. I think that's going to be, for me, this workshop, the gist of it is really making sure that your writing is as accessible as possible. And that can mean a lot of different things. I don't necessarily mean just like visually, you know, accessible physically, but also the language is accessible, the content is accessible. So yeah, I think, you know, there are a lot of great tools out there that can be helpful, AI tools specifically, if you know, want to have your work double checked, you know, simply putting it in Gemini, our campus version of Gemini, because then, you know, your information is protected by campus. That might be one way to kind of get it checked for language. But I talk a little bit about readability later on as well. So Taylor, I see your second question here about resources. Let me know if some of those were helpful, but we'll also talk a little bit more about some readability tools later on. And yes, Joe mentions the Academic Success Center, the Writing Center. That is really helpful, but unfortunately they don't take appointments for anyone who is not an undergraduate student. So I don't know if anyone here is an undergraduate student. I think most of us are graduate students, or not necessarily, but unfortunately the Writing Center is not available to folks who aren't undergraduates. I will say that there is a, let me see if I can pull up a link for them. The GSA, the Graduate Student Association, has a graduate assistant who is a writing advisor for graduate students. Let me see if I can pull up that information. I'll put it in the chat. So this is someone who is a graduate student here at UMBC, and their job is to support graduate student writing projects. So this is one resource that you might want to look into if you're looking for writing support, the writing advisor through the GSA. There's also the Graduate Student Professional Development, the GP or GSPD. They're a group on campus. They offer a lot of different resources for writing and other professional development. I presented at their dissertation house. Yes, thanks, Joe, this summer. And so that's one resource for writing if you're a graduate student that you might want to look into. So there are some writing resources for graduate students on campus. And if you want to learn more about that, let me know. I'd be happy to connect you with some folks as well. I think that was all the questions in the chat. Any other questions before we move on? All right. So next, let's talk about, we've got these kind of 6 trademarks of technical writing in mind. Let's kind of take a bigger look at a full document, tone, detail, and thinking about audience when we talk about all these different things. So I mentioned IMRAD in the last section. IMRAD stands for the different parts of a piece of technical writing. We're probably, a lot of us, familiar with these when you read academic articles, but just so for clarification, IMRAD stands for Introduction, Methods, Results, and Discussion. So these are the 4 key components of a piece of technical writing. And let's go through each of these. So an introduction, it should include, why we asked the question that we asked, covering a broad look at your writing, your research, your experiment, whatever it is, why we approach that. The methods should be the how of your research or your writing, how you went about answering the question or asking the question, how you came to the results that you did. And then, of course, that leads into the results section. What did you find through those methods? Just stating the facts, what those results were of your research or your experiment, and then finishing with a discussion. What does this mean? What are the implications of your research on your field? How does it relate back to your original question? What it means for, the discipline that you're in, that you're writing to. So when you are setting out to write a piece of technical writing, these are the 4 sections that you really need to include. And you need to include them in this order as well. Because again, it's all about making sure that your writing is as accessible to the reader as possible. And so they're going to be expecting a piece of writing that follows this order of things. And if it doesn't, it may be confusing to them. They may have a hard time reading it, or may be confused as to where your results are if they come in a different place in the writing as they should. Is anyone familiar with IMRAD or have heard this before? Yeah. Ihsan, so maybe not this specific acronym, but we're probably all familiar with the idea of having an introduction section, a method section, a results, and a discussion section. I find this acronym helpful to remember the way that the order of these things should go in. So in addition to, the way things are ordered, the order that they go in your paper, these are some other things that can make your papers more accessible, your writing more easy to navigate for your readers. So we have heading, figure title, paragraph opener or topic sentence, and captions. So let's talk about each of these. So headings, it's best to have something that's descriptive instead of, vague, so that those who are maybe unfamiliar with this topic can read the heading of, whatever it is, whether it's a section or a section of your paper, and they can have a good, clear understanding of what's to follow. For any kind of figure that you include, whether it's an image, table, graph, you need to make sure that you're including a descriptive title, not just figure 3. For paragraph opener, we talked a little bit about starting topic sentences. Here's an example of one. A weak example would be, there were several findings. Well, tell us what those findings were instead of just, leaving the sentence at that. And then finally, it's important to have captions. Captions come underneath your graphs, your images, your tables. Again, so that those who are maybe new to this topic, or even not, who are new to your research, have an idea of what it is exactly they're looking at. So let's look at each of these examples in turn. So instead of using results 2, what are those results? Thermal stability of composite films would be an example. Figure title, still have it numbered, figure 3, but then what is figure 3? Tensile strength versus graphene content. A good example of a topic sentence would be talking exactly what those findings were. Film tensile strength increased by 15% after graphene reinforcement. And these are just obviously all examples that I created. And then the caption, that caption goes a long way to describing what it is that you're looking at. So let's talk a little bit about how audience plays a role in all of these. So depending, your technical writing may be seen by a number of different people. And a lot of times when you're writing, you have an idea of who it is that's going to be looking at this, whether it's a group of peer reviewers for a journal you're applying or submitting to. Maybe you're applying to a grant and there's a funding panel that's going to be reviewing your grant application. Maybe you're writing for the general public, whether it may be a blog post or something else. I think those reports that we looked at earlier might be kind of in between peer, expert, and general public, because there might be times where you don't know who your audience is going to be, and so that can be difficult, trying to strike a good balance. But thinking about peer experts, so when you're applying or submitting something to a journal, the tone you should be striking should be something like neutral, obviously kind of trying to stay away from any bias or assertions, but precise, full methods, full statistics, as much data as you can, because the people who are reading it are going to be familiar with your field, familiar with the discipline, and aren't going to need necessarily everything spelled out to a lower degree of detail. So here, the example I gave here is, for someone who's not a member of this discipline or in this field, that's, to me personally, that doesn't mean much of anything. It's just letters and numbers. But for someone who's familiar with this field, that's going to make a lot of sense. If you're writing for a funding panel, the tone you should be striking is persuasive. You're trying to persuade them of something. You're trying to persuade them to give you money. So thinking persuasive, really focusing on the impact that your research has or the potential research might have, the outcomes, thinking about that, and really making sure that you're detailing any kind of key results, the significance of things. And here the example, talks about exactly why the graphene boosts heat resistance, why that's important, because it enables safer food packaging. Okay. And then for the general public, when you know that you're writing for the general public, someone who's not necessarily immersed in this field, the tone should be more conversational. Eliminate as much jargon as you can, making sure that you are really spelling out every acronym, every kind of vocabulary word that might be specific to your field. Minimizing the number of statistics because they may not mean much to folks who are not in the discipline. An example here I gave, a tiny amount of graphene helps this ecoplastic stay firm at higher temperatures. Pretty straightforward, easy to understand even for someone who's not in this discipline. Any thoughts on audience? Any suggestions or times that you have run into a situation where the audience was different than what you're used to writing for? So we talked a little bit about readability, and Taylor, I think, had questions about how to make sure that you're striking the right tone, the right vocabulary for readability. Here are 3 resources for checking readability. The first, some of us may be familiar with this. I know I remember using it when I was in college. Microsoft Word has readability statistics. You can find it under the review menu and then spelling and grammar. These are some numbers to strike for. So Microsoft Word looks at 2 different metrics, and a lot of these kind of focus on the same metrics. It's the Flesch reading ease and Flesch Kincaid grade level. Maybe some of us remember this. But when you are looking at Microsoft Word readability statistics, reading ease, greater or less than or equal to 45 is good for expert papers, something at a college level. 60 is kind of ideal for a mixed reader or more general audience, maybe an audience you're not really sure what their level is going to be. There are a number of free online tools that I've listed here: WebFX readability tool, Good Calculators, and Character Calculator. They measure the same things. For these, you copy and paste your text into these tools in plain text. So not necessarily so helpful if you have a whole paper you're looking to get checked, But if you're trying to spot check your writing, this might be a good option. Again, they're free. The websites aren't very pretty, but they don't have any AI element to them. So there's, minimal concern about privacy, copyright sort of things. But so these are some good tools to check out. And then if you, want to just check over real quick yourself, one kind of easy tool is just trying to read something aloud. And anytime you kind of stumble or you find yourself confused or pausing over things, maybe that might be a good part to revise, to look back at. Giving your paper, your writing to someone who's not in your discipline and asking them to read might also be helpful. And then again, sentences should have no more than 25 words. If they have more than 25 words, we need to do some editing. Because anything longer than that means that you're not really sticking to readability, conciseness, that sort of thing. Yeah, Nobin, go ahead.
It's a gold standard for every domain, or it's a hyperparameter, depends on the domain?
Definitely not like a requirement. I think it's a good rule of thumb, 25 words. And then these readability numbers, again, just a good rule of thumb, but not hard and fast. I would doubt, I don't obviously know this for certain, but I would strongly doubt that any funding panel or group of peer reviewers are going to be counting every word in your sentence to make sure you're not going over 25, but it's just a good rule of thumb. Other questions? All right. So we're going to start to wrap up here. I've got some resources I want to share with everybody. But first, 5 things to kind of take away. Just broad strokes. These are the 5 things that if you don't think of anything else today after our workshop, these are the things to remember. Clear purpose, beginning your writing, in your introduction section, but then also each paragraph with a clear purpose. What is it you're trying to say? What is it that paragraph says? Using precise, short verbs, being concise, and eliminating any extra worded verbiage. Making sure that you're thinking about the reader when you're structuring your writing, following the map of IMRAD, or if there's another acronym that you like to use, but really thinking about introduction, methodology, results, and discussion. We also, probably a lot of us familiar with abstract. That might normally come before introduction. You might group it as part of the introduction. Conclusion is another word that you're probably used to seeing, but at its true essence, IMRAD is a common acronym that you see in a lot of technical writing guides. Thinking about audience, always thinking back to who is the audience, what are my goals with this writing, and what am I trying to convey to that particular audience, and then calibrating your tone, the detail, the language that you use to that audience, and then using things like headings, topic sentences, captions, those types of things to help guide your reader through your piece of writing. Because remember, if they are confused, they're less likely to be able to replicate your research, grant you that funding, accept your proposal, accept your article, all of our goals for when we're working on technical writing. These are a few resources I want to be able to share, be sure to share with you. The first is a scientific writing or technical writing guide. We do have the ebook version of this available for unlimited views, so everyone here could go ahead and take a look at that. It's the 2018 edition. I think this is the most recent edition of this guidebook, so it's still applicable, but definitely take a look at it if you are interested in like a full-on guidebook. This is a guide from UC Irvine Libraries, the Writing a Scientific Paper. I thought it was a good summary. It's pretty detailed. It has a lot of content to it, but it's a good one. Purdue OWL, a lot of us are probably familiar with their online writing lab. They have a section on professional and technical writing. And then SciLife, it's a for-profit company, but I thought that this little article for like a broad overview of technical writing and some best practices, it was pretty good. So take that one with a grain of salt. Thank you so much. We definitely went through this quickly. As I said, this is the first time I'm offering this workshop. The version I offered over the summer was 3 hours long. So I really was very diligent making sure to cut it down to an hour. I was maybe a little over diligent. But so any feedback you all could give would be much appreciated. We're planning on offering this workshop again, maybe in the spring or maybe again next fall. But I hope this was helpful for those of you who are unfamiliar with technical writing or were just curious, wanted to learn more about it. I hope that you learned something today. I do have a QR code here that will take you to our feedback form about our workshops where you can kind of share how this went for you. Are there other workshops you'd like to see? We're just now building out this series of graduate student skills workshops. So if you have suggestions on other topics you'd like to see as part of this series, please let us know in this survey. But I'm going to go ahead and open it up. We've got plenty of time for questions or feedback, thoughts, comments. Please feel free to put them in the chat or come off mute. Oh, thanks, Maria. I appreciate that. Yeah, thanks, y'all. Maria, it is recorded. I'm going to send out the recording and the slides to everyone who is registered on MyUMBC, and if you were here online. I've captured, the WebEx automatically captures email addresses. So if you're here online, you'll be sending you'll send the recording probably tomorrow. But if you have colleagues you think mentioned they might want to be here today, feel free to forward the recording and the slides to whoever. We also will be uploading the recording to our YouTube page later on. It's on how to relate all paragraph in a section. Could you maybe talk a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Yeah, sure. So let's say I'm writing an introduction. So I may have a couple of paragraphs in that. So my question is how to arrange them in my introduction section, like how to make a relation to all the paragraphs.
Yeah, I see what you're saying now. So I think, you don't necessarily have to. I think when you're writing a section, having a good opening sentence at the start of that section is perhaps more important than having, an opening sentence at every paragraph. A paragraph serves a purpose. It has a unique idea and it's limited to just that paragraph. So when you're starting a section, having a good sentence or two that introduces what that section is about and what will be discussed in that section, I think that's really the goal there. Not necessarily every paragraph has to have something that relates it to the entire section. So really focused on that first paragraph, introducing that whole section, and then allowing each paragraph that follows relates to the section. And then when you start the next section, like your results, then the first couple sentences of the first paragraph of the results section should really summarize what it is you're going to be saying in the results, and then so on and so forth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Link to the feedback page. I can grab that real quick. Does the QR code not work? I had an issue with QR codes earlier today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen while I pull this up. Okay, the QR works fine, but I could also understand if folks don't have their phones easily available. Yeah, let me pull that link up just real quick. Other questions while I do this? There's a link for the feedback form. You're welcome. If there are no other questions, we can go ahead and wrap up early. I hope that you'll fill out the feedback form. Let me know what you thought of the workshop, and feel free. Oh, let me put in the chat our MyUMBC page. I should have had information about the rest of our workshops ready to go, and I'll make sure to do that for the next workshop. But we have 3 other in this series of graduate student workshops. We of course have other workshops that are useful. Oh, thanks, Joe. Let me go ahead and share my screen with this. We have other workshops that would be great for graduate students, but these are the ones that are specifically part of the this series. So there's the where's their post? Here we go. This is what I was looking for. So there's systematic review, sorry. Strategies for conducting systematic reviews. That's Tuesday, October 28th from 4 to 5. There's advanced research strategies. That is Monday, November 10th from 12 to 1 p.m. And managing and organizing your research. Tools for organizing your research from start to finish. That's Tuesday, November 18th from 4 to 5. These will all be hybrid or virtual like today's. The systematic reviews and the managing and organizing your research, that is hybrid. So there is an in-person option for that one as well. So if you're interested in the rest of these, go ahead and register for them like you did for this one. But thank you all for being here. Good luck with the rest of your semester, and hopefully I'll see you at some of these other workshops.